As many know, we read the Torah in an annual cycle, starting from the beginning of the book of Genesis all the way through the end of Deuteronomy, and then we start again. We just did that. We had that moment where we finished the Torah and started again just this past week at Simchat Torah. That was the celebration of that transition moment from the end to the beginning. And now we're back at the beginning of Genesis, and we'll read through this year until we get to Simchat Torah of next year, where we start again. There are a number of different traditions as to how to do that. Much of the conservative movement, I would say a vast majority of the conservative movement, reads what is called the triennial cycle, which means that we divide each of the weekly readings into thirds, and we actually read through everything in a 3-year cycle as opposed to a 1-year cycle. And it's based on a tradition from the Jerusalem Talmud on how they used to do that. They used to read it in this way. And so every year I sort of have to say which part of the portion are we looking at. So we just finished the third last year. So this year we are starting on the first third. So we're going to begin, as Julie Andrews says in Sound of Music, at the very beginning, right? It's a very good place to start. And I actually want to take that a step further, because the song, as Julie Andrews sings it, says, with words, we begin with A, B, C, and with music, we begin with Do, Re, Mi. What do we begin with in creation? What are the building blocks of creation, right? If language is A, B, C, and music is Do, Re, Mi, what are the building blocks of creation? What would you say? If somebody had to say to you, looking back at these 7 days of creation, it's a section that most of us know, at least passing well. How does God create? What are the building blocks?
Sun, earth, animals.
All right. So we've got the sun, we've got the earth, we've got the animals. By the way, I don't usually have the opportunity to have visual media at my disposal. But if you look at these three stained glass windows, those are the days of creation, starting from here. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, right? So you can look at those stained glass windows and see visually some of those building blocks. So sun, moon, light, darkness, okay? What else? What are the building blocks of creation? Yes? Okay, Beresheet, right? That in the beginning, that we have to start from someplace. That idea of even starting is actually a divine idea, because why did God start? Why did what created all of that? So just that impetus, that idea to create, is already a fundamental building block of creation. Yeah. Day and night. There was night, I should say night and day, right? There was nighttime, there was daytime. So one of the fundamental building blocks is God divides it into different discrete sections that we now call days, right? And that's how God creates. Anybody else?
I think it's important to acknowledge from what he created, and it's the words tohu and bohu.
Excellent. So Diana saying we have to recognize from what God created, and depending on actually which religious and which philosophical tradition you're coming from, right? A lot of philosophers will talk about creatio ex nihilo, right? Creation out of nothingness. That is the idea of creation in Genesis. But the Jewish perspective actually is there was something there beforehand. It was these two words, tohu and vohu, this chaos, right? So it wasn't creation out of nothing, it was making order out of chaos, which is a little bit different. It's a little bit different. Anything else? What are the fundamental building blocks? All right, well, let's look and see. We're going to turn to page 3 in the red books that are in front of you. Bereshit bara Elohim, when God began to create the heavens and the earth being tohu and vohu, right? Unformed and void, with darkness on the surface of the deep, a wind from God sweeping over the water, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So what's the building block of creation? We said light.
It was God saying.
Yes. And God said, right? We forget, we get so focused into the what God created that we forget a little bit, how did God create the universe? It was with words. It was with words. The fundamental building block of creation, according to our tradition and according to the book of Genesis, are words. That is how God created everything. And it's a very powerful idea. It's one that I actually use in pretty much every wedding that I do when we get to the Sheva Brachot, when we get to those 7 blessings. And we talk about the transition of going from a couple to a married couple. And I say, we don't drink magic potions or wave magic wands or anything like that. It's the words that we say that build our worlds, that change everything. Sometimes it's the words we don't say that change everything too, right? But the words have incredible power. And that's what I want to focus on a little bit today for this new year, is creation begins with speech. And our Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, picks up on it and actually says, Be'asara ma'amarot nivra ha'olam. There were 10 different utterances, 10 different things that God said that ultimately created the world. And then they go back and forth as to which those are and what they are, and there's arguments, and that's fine. But everybody seems to agree there were 10 different things that God said, which is interesting because there were, 7 days, but 10 different utterances. So this idea of the world, the universe, us, everything being created with words, we see that in Psalms as well. Bidvar Adonai Shamayim Na'asu. With the words of God, the word of God, the heavens were created. Everything was created. So I guess the question is, what does that mean for us? Okay? What does that mean for us? Why did God choose? Because one has to assume God being omnipotent, God being all-knowing, could have chosen a lot of different ways to create the world. So why words? Why words? What does that come to teach us? What does that come to teach us? And it's interesting because there are so many people that argue, the story of creation, it doesn't really have a lot to teach us in the modern world because we're struggling with all these intricacies of, was it really 7 days? Was it not 7 days? Is this the order that God really created? Does it match up with evolution? Does it not match up with evolution? We're missing the point, folks. The lesson of this is creation with words. And why is that such an important lesson, Neil?
So we communicate to each other.
It's how we communicate to each other. Good. And why is that important?
It's how you learn what God's ultimate intentions are going to be and how we behave towards each other.
Good, because Neil says we learn what God's intentions are and how we can communicate with each other. Yeah. It creates understanding. It creates meaning. The meaning part is so important, right? How do we create meaningful? Like, what do we do? Yeah, there are actions that we do to say that this day is different than yesterday, right? We light candles, but it's actually the way we speak about the day that shapes the day. It's the brachot, it's the changes in the liturgy that force us to go, this is different. And if we wouldn't be saying those things, if we just said the same words and do the same things that we did every other day, we wouldn't recognize that change. Words highlight meaning. Yeah, Michal. Yeah.
We have to be listening for the voice of God.
Yeah. So we know later on that we as human beings have a hard time seeing, visually understanding God. But we as Jews are the people who listen, right? Yeah, we do na'aseh, but then nishma. We listen. That's what we do. Shema Yisrael. We listen. That's who we are. We're listeners. Maybe that's why so many of us go into therapy, and become therapists, right? We're listeners. That's what we do. Good. What else? Yeah.
I'd like to say that some people brought up communication, which is awesome. I'm actually in the field of communication.
Mm-hmm.
Communication can happen on many levels. Animals communicate. Birds have beautiful communication. That's how they make more birds. But the idea of speech, dibur, is unique to human beings.
Yes.
And that, I think, is really the biggest difference. He created the planet for humans, for man, woman, however you want to say it. And then he said, well, and you shouldn't be alone. So then along came a few more people.
So we can talk.
And so that's, I think, ultimately what it was. The world was created. There's a saying, two sayings. One is the world was created for me, and the other is I am but thus.
So I want to agree with what you say and reshape it a little bit, Diana, which is, you said, there's a lot of ways to communicate, and animals communicate, right, as well. They communicate intention in a lot of different ways. But the ability to speak, the ability to communicate the way that human beings do, you said is unique to human beings. And I'm going to actually say it's actually not unique to human beings. That's what this story teaches us. It is a divine gift. It actually makes us more like God, right? This ability to speak is how God creates everything. And God said to us, I'm giving you that too. And you have the ability then to create like I do. You also have the ability to destroy with that speech. That's a choice then that we're going to have to make. That comes in the second chapter when we, eat the apple or eat the fruit and all those sorts of things, takes us, right? So we have a choice to make, but it starts with our ability to speak and to communicate. And I'm going to come back to what you said, because I think it's not only meaning, which is so important, but if we were not able to communicate, we wouldn't be here as Jews. We wouldn't be here as human beings. Because we not only communicate meaning, but that's how we pass our information, our knowledge, and we pass that meaning on from one generation to the next. That's what we're doing. We're communicating these values to that next generation. So then they pick it up and they communicate it. And we've been doing that for millennia. And these values have continued to be with us, have continued to follow us. And it's all with this power of speech. You could argue, by the way, and there's a secondary sermon in, it's also walking the walk and not just talking the talk. But that's also a way that we communicate. We have to explain. We have to share. We have to grow in that way. Yes? Yes. God has given us that ability to create with words. We have the ability to also be created or recreated. And we know that we have the power to shape ourselves and create our own sense of self with the words that we speak. We also have the power to influence other people, for good and for bad, right? When we say words that hurt, when we say words that tear people down, that has a literal impact on somebody, right? It shapes them. It shapes them in a really amazingly powerful way. So as we start to understand the lesson in these first days of creation, I would argue it's less about how the world was created and much more about the purpose behind that creation or the method of that creation to give us an insight in how we can continue to build and to create the world. We as Jews see humanity as human beings as partners in creation with God. Creation is not completed at the end of the sixth day. There's a lot of things to do. And we are partners in that. And therefore, the things not only that we do, but the things that we say are just as important as anything else in creating the world that's around us. And we see that. We see that happening every single day. It's, I would argue, one of the real challenges that we have in these last, especially 10 years, with words losing their meaning. Right? Beresheet tells us that words have the ultimate power. And we are living an existence that seems to say words have lost their meaning. And not just the words that we say, but the words that we write, the words that we post, all of these things are out there. And we forget they have an impact. We forget they build up and they tear down. And one of the things that has protected people, has protected the integrity of the word, has always been, well, if you say it, I know who you are. And I can say to you, I disagree. In today's day and age, it's so easy to say anything we want to anonymously. And we say things anonymously that we would never dare to say, at least most of us, some would. But we would never dare to say to somebody's face directly. It takes away the power of these words, or takes away the impact of these words. We forget of what it is that we're doing. And our tradition has always been super clear about the power of words, not just in this section, but throughout. We talk about Lashon Hara, we talk about gossip and the evil tongue. There's huge sections of text about that, right? We talk about how we turn words into blessings. Rav Nachman of Breslov used to say that the world was created through words, but it's sustained through words of prayer. Right? That creation is ongoing. It's something that we take part in when we're here, when we're praying, when we bring those words that focus us on those ideas. But I would argue that probably one of the most powerful statements in the modern time about words comes from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who in his book Man's Quest for God said clearly, words create worlds. When words lose their sacredness, human life loses its meaning. I'll say that again, because it's one of the most powerful statements I think that Heschel has stated, and he's got a lot of good ones. So, words create worlds. When words lose their sacredness, life loses its meaning. And it's important to recognize that he didn't talk about truth. He didn't even talk about meaning itself, right? He talked in terms of the words. He didn't talk about whether they're nice or whether they're not nice, because sometimes sacred words are words of rebuke. To say, wait a second, this isn't right, and we have to stand up, and we have to say no. It's not just always about being nice and building each other up. Sometimes we fight against the things that are important to fight against in this world. It's about sacredness. It's about holiness. And to me, that comes directly back to this portion. The most fundamental divine act that God ever did was to create the world. Everything stems from that, because without that, the rest of the story is meaningless. And in that most fundamental divine act, the most fundamental aspect of that is what God said, are the words. That creation was an act of holiness, was an act of sacredness. And when we remove ourselves from understanding that our words need to come from a place of holiness and sacredness, of care, of building, Even when that building sometimes you have to tear down to build up something better. I get it. But if it comes from that place of sacredness, then we have meaning in this world. When we forget that, as unfortunately I think we are tending to do in the modern world, life loses that sense of meaning. Creation loses that sense of meaning, and we go back to tohu vavohu. We go back to that sense of chaos that God was trying to get us out of from the very, very beginning. So as we read the 7 days of creation today, read it with this eye towards the power of words, the power to create and build, and those words coming from a place of being a foundation for everything else that is about to come. Shabbat shalom, everyone.